Hi, everybody. How about this? Oh, it tells me I'm live. So, hi. It turns out I was talking on my own personal page for a while, so I apologize. I'm Elaine Kuhn, and believe it or not, I'm the coordinator for the Kenton County Public Library's local history and genealogy department. Oh, well, if you can't laugh at your own mistakes, what's the point, right? Well, anyway, so what I was talking about on my own stream, and we'll just say it again. Um, I hope you all are well. I hope you are sheltering and doing all the safe things you're supposed to do. I know it's a challenge for a lot of people, and especially for us who are used to being around lots of people all the time. Um, I think a lot of us are fortunate that we can get out, at least into our driveways and yards and sidewalks and what. So I recommend getting out and getting some sunshine if it's possible. So, in the meantime, I also wanted to remind you that these are interesting times we are living through. And why I say that is that you have to realize you're living through history right now. Okay. And so for your future family members, I implore you to write down your thoughts and memories and experiences while we're going through this pandemic. It will make a difference in the future. Okay. Don't say, oh, nobody's going to want to know what I thought about it. That's not true. There will be future people who will be interested in how you experience this pandemic. Okay, so take time and either write it down or create an online diary or something and talk about things you observed, how you felt, what it was like to go into a grocery store and see empty shelves like everybody probably has in the last couple of weeks. I know for myself, that's what made it real is when I went into the grocery store and it wasn't just the toilet paper aisle, it was lots of aisles were empty. This we're not used to that. So talk about how that felt. The other thing is we're coming up um, to a very religious period for a lot of folks, Easter, Passover, and so forth. And for a lot of people, this is going to be the first time in their lives that they don't share this holiday with family or with their other church members. Um, so write about that as well. I mean, talk about how you were able to reach out to your community. Maybe your church is doing virtual broadcasts. Maybe some of you are getting together on Zoom or whatever other group video chat, and you share your experiences that way. So keep that in mind as well, um, because you're living in history right now. And so somebody in the future is going to care about your experiences with that. Trust me. um, that hit home for me this last week because don't we all now have lots and lots of time to do those projects we've been putting off? Well, it is for me. So when I'm not helping people online or talking to my coworkers, I've been cleaning out my storage room, which contains a lot of material from my mom's house. And whoo boy, she saved everything. Um, I mean, the cards that she got when people gave her flowers. I mean, matchbooks from weddings and that sort of thing. Um, And I found some notes that she had written when she was going through a really hard time in her own life, specifically when my parents divorced. And it was very, very hard on her. And even though it makes me sad to read it, I also appreciate that she wrote down her thoughts and experiences from the time. It makes it way more real. And you get to you read how it affected her. And still makes her more real. She's been gone for almost, 12 years, but boy, it brought it home. So that's something that you can do with your free time. The other things I wanted to talk about today. Oh, and another thing I thought of too this week. My colleague Krista talked last week about doing oral histories, which is always a good thing. Um, but one of the questions, if you get a chance to ask your older family members, is do they remember similar experiences like this, outbreaks? There have been flu outbreaks before in various years. It's just that this one has hit so hard, so fast, and it's brought the economy to a almost halt and things like that. But you may have relatives who remember polio, or even beyond that, when people died from diseases that we now get vaccines for. For example, I remember, now I know my sisters don't because they're too small, but I remember when the three of us got the measles. And I remember mom keeping the drapes closed because the light bothered our eyes, and lots of people, thankfully, don't have to experience that anymore. But that's the kind of stuff you could ask them when you're doing your oral history questions, because they may be able to tell you a little bit about that. Okay, so the other things I wanted to talk about are things that go with doing genealogy research, things to remember. Above all, besides it being a sickness, genealogy is puzzle solving. It's detective work. And it's detective work without having to carry a gun and a badge, right? Hopefully not. But anyway, so always keep in mind that you're looking for clues, okay? So always keep your mind open. You may come across a name that's close to your family name and you go, oh, no, that's not them. You don't know yet until it's been proven. So one of the things that I want you to always remember is let go of how you've always spelled your name. Yes, your family may have spelled your name the same way for 200 years. That doesn't mean that the county clerk or the census taker or the judge or anybody else wrote it down that way. There's also a chance that the handwriting that may have gotten indexed, they might have transposed a letter. They may have misinterpreted a letter, because if any of you have ever looked at old handwriting, some of the letters look a lot alike, and it can really cause havoc when you go to look for a name. Now, I will say in the two biggest databases that people use, being Ancestry and Familysearch, they both have their, let's say, bright spots when it comes to looking for variation of names. Familysearch, their algorithms for searching for names are really good. I mean, I never tell their search engine to look for an exact name. It's not worth it. It's too narrow. I usually just put the name in and let it look for the names and different spellings. You might get a lot of hits. Those you can narrow down with the qualifiers, the year, the country, the gender, and so forth and so on. But their search algorithms are really, really good. And so keep that in mind. Even though you might come up with a hit that the name is kind of goofy, look at the record or look at the entry to see maybe there are some other clues there that might show you that, yes, this is the person you are looking for, okay? And in Ancestry, they give you the option to use wildcards and SoundX, and now they have this sounds like. And those are all good features that you can use if you don't find the name spelled the way you think it should be spelled, okay? And then also keep in mind when it comes to first names that a lot of people hated their first names, and so they would go by their middle names. So if you find a middle name, use that in your search as well. Then we go through the period of time, especially in the late 1800s up through probably the mid 1900s, that people like to go by their initials. My grandfather did that. He was a auctioneer, and he went by W.R. Savage, which actually stands for Wendell Russell Savage. But anybody else coming from the outside would see that W.R. and they're like, who is this? So you have to keep that in mind as well. And even in censuses, sometimes you'll find where they got the last name listed, but then all the household members are only listed by a first initial. That's kind of maddening, but you will run into that. So those are some challenges. Also, you may end up with people going by a completely different nickname. Okay, so let's see. One of my grandmother's half brothers, his name, I always knew him as Arlie, Arlie. Everything I ever saw said Arlie until I got to his marriage certificate, and his real name was Arlington. And now my grandma's gone, so there's no way I could have checked with her. All of her, she was the last one of her family to go. So I would have never looked for Arlington. Now, maybe that's just me being silly, but he was always Arlie, Uncle Arlie, and Aunt Regina. Aunt Regina. Regina is spelled like you think, Regina, which most people say Regina or Regina. Hers was Regina. The G was hard, which she was a sweetie, so that's why I like her name so much. The other thing is always do your math when you're looking for people, especially when it comes to marriages and births of children. Yes, it may be possible, but there's not so great of a chance that, a 70-year-old man and a 10-year-old girl had kids, okay? Or a father has sons who are older than him. Okay, I've seen this happen. So always when you run into things like that, where it's like, boy, that just doesn't add up. It may be because you're missing a generation. Okay, and when that happens, then just cast your net a little wider and see who's out there that might explain why maybe these two people are living in the same household, but there was a generation in between. Maybe the grandparents are raising kids. Which reminds me of another thing, some of the weird stuff that you'll find in the censuses. I was helping a guy, this has been a long time ago, try to find his father and grandfather. I think it was in the 1930 census or 20. Anyway, he knew that the mother, the wife, had died. Then he couldn't find him in the census. Well, it turns out that they were living with her parents, and the census taker enumerated them under their last name. They were there, they were just under the wife's maiden name. So you may run into some weird things like that. Okay. What was the other one I was thinking of? Oh, always trust your gut. Okay. If you find something online and it doesn't quite look right, then dig in and find out what is the real answer. This is a challenge when you start using family trees that other people have done. I'm not saying that people are putting up inaccurate information on purpose. It just may be that they don't have the same information as you do. For example, like I finally broke down and got a membership to Ancestry. Yes, I'm a cheap librarian, so what can I say? But I did because I did the DNA test and I wanted to start building my tree. But this happened also on Familysearch. Okay, so my grandmother, her father had been married once before, and her mother had been married once before. And I know which one of them was her dad, but a lot of other people don't have access to that information. And so they keep wanting to hook her to her mom's first husband. And that's not correct. So you see what I mean? Weigh it and show. And if you do go, when you're building your own tree, be sure and cite your sources. Where did you find this information? And in some cases, you can even add a note saying, this is why I know this is accurate. Okay. So another thing I wanted to talk about before we start talking about sources, especially from our library, is that always look for everything you can of a certain type of record. And what I'm thinking about, I just had this happen. I was helping a lady last week or so try to sort out a family that had a very common last name, and it changed a lot, different spellings, and even in the same generation. It turned out that there was a son that the patron didn't know about. And his first name was the same. He had his father's first name, even though he was the last child. Well, how I ended up finding him was I was digging around through newspapers.com, and that's a database you can subscribe to. Depending on what you want to spend your money on, I use it myself because it has a lot of newspapers in it in the areas where I research, so it's worth the money to me. So anyway, I'm looking in there and I see this guy, and I kind of put him off to the side because one of his occupations was butcher, and his father and his brothers had been butchers as well. I thought, well, but he lived about 60 miles away from where they did. Well, so I finally started digging into this guy, and it turns out that, okay, he was born in December, and 2 weeks later, his mother died, and the father just couldn't take care of him. Okay. But how I found this out was I go in and I find out when this guy dies. And he was a somewhat prominent member of the community. I found several obituaries for him in the area newspapers. And 3 of them were almost word for word the same. They said it confirmed who his parents were and when he was born and where he was born. That was all good. But then the 4th one was the one that says that when he was 2 months old, Mr. and Mrs. John Smith, I can't remember what their real names were, took him and raised him as their own. Now, I would have never found that ever had I not looked at that 4th obituary. Okay. So then I started digging around a little more, and I find an article from when he was about 20, 21, where one of his older brothers came down to where he was living and made contact with him. And he didn't even know all the siblings he still had. And he went up to where they lived and he reunited with them. And I think he learned the trade of butchering from them. So that whole clue of butcher came back and proved that it was right. This was the right guy. Plus the fact that then I had found that obituary that said, yes, he was raised somewhere else. So that's my point of always checking all your sources. I also believe in going back and checking sources you've checked before, because you never know, you may have gained some more information that you didn't have previous to that. Okay. All right. So for the rest of the day, I'd like to talk about some of the things that we offer in our databases that you might not know are there. Okay. The first one I want to talk about is our Faces and Places database. Now, I know my colleagues have mentioned it in the previous programs, but I want you to know some of the things in there you might not think would be in there. For example, yes, there's a picture of George Clooney when he's a kid and he's as cute as a button, but there's also things like pictures of tombstones. And you might say, oh, Elaine, that's morbid. No, it's not for a genealogist, okay? Occasionally, we get pictures from all over the place. People donate photographs to us, or we go out and take pictures. And some of you might know that we once a year go out and do a cemetery tour. So we have lots of photographs that we take and we'll put them online and we add them to Faces and Places. So what you can do, and because Faces and Places is keyword searchable, then you can, I would say, do just a general search on the word cemeteries. Okay. Now it'll bring up a whole bunch of hits. You can look to the side where the subject headings are. They're usually on the right side of the page. And it breaks them down by cemetery if the cemetery is known. So for example, Mother of God Cemetery or Highland Cemetery and so forth. Linden Grove Cemetery. And then we enter as much information as we know about that photograph. So you can actually see the burial pictures there. Now, there is a wonderful website called findagrave.com, and we are very fortunate in Northern Kentucky that we have a couple, three people who are very active, what we call find a gravers, for lack of a better term, who will go out and basically go through the cemetery and take pictures and record the data and upload it to Find a Grave. And if they know anything more, like who their siblings were, who their spouses were, that'll be added as well. But you can also put in a person's name in Faces and Places. And if there's a photograph in there, that'll help. Find a picture. A lot of them are in black and white, and that's okay. But there are a few color pictures in there as well. We do have a lot of photographs in there from the old Kentucky Post. So that's why a lot of them look like, ooh, that looks like it belonged in the newspaper. Well, that's because it was. So, but like I said, we get lots of donations from people. That's why we have pictures from families that took vacations, like up to Michigan or to Chicago or even to Egypt. We do have photographs from a family from Covington that took a trip to Egypt in the 1920s. How cool is that? And then the other database that I wanted, and so to find Faces and Places on our website, you go to kentonlibrary.org, and then you select the History and Genealogy button. And then as you scroll down, I do believe there'll be a link right there to Faces and Places. Or you can do a Google search on Faces and Places. It's usually the first one hit that comes up. So, get in there and dig around. And also, we do accept donations. Now, obviously, we're closed right now. So if you have some you want to physically bring in, hang on to those until we reopen. Or if you have some that are digitized and you want to share them with us, contact us at our history email account, which is history@kentonlibrary.org. And then we'll see what we can work out. Okay. The other database I wanted to talk about is GenKey. This one, I call it our best kept secret. And it's not because we don't promote it, we do. But people just don't realize just how much great stuff is in there. Yes, you're going to find indexes to cemetery records, church records, different things like that. But you're also going to find scanned images of all kinds of ephemera, such as programs from the Holmes High School graduations from way back. You're going to find diaries that we've been given that have been scanned and indexed. Those are really interesting. Like I said, they detail what their life was like at the time. Krista talked a little bit last week about the coroner's records. That's an interesting source to look at. And that's one that's ongoing. We're still working on that one. And just odds and ends of things. I mean, it's really becoming our documents monster. There's over 500,000 entries in there, I think, the last time I checked. So again, go in there, search around. One of the nice things you can do is browse names. So you can see some of the different spellings of names that you might find in there. Which, because it doesn't have a sound, it does have a little bit of a Soundex search, but it's just nice to see how it was recorded, if that makes sense. And then, of course, we have our newspaper index. It's called the Northern Kentucky Newspaper Index. It's now in a new form. It has a bit of a learning curve to it, but I guarantee that the data that used to be in it is pretty much there. It's just a different way of using it, okay? And maybe at some point we'll do a little tutorial about it that you can actually watch us work the screen, and it'll make more sense that way, okay? But also remember that with your Kenton County Library card, you have access to quite a few online newspaper databases. We have the Kentucky Post. We have the Historical Cincinnati Enquirer that goes from 1841 to 2019. And the older ones are like full text. You can actually see the newspaper and the articles, which is wonderful. We just recently got newspaperarchive.com, and a big thanks goes out to our virtual librarian, Nicole, because she was able to make an arrangement for us to get the Ohio and Kentucky newspapers. Usually the vendor wants you to do just one state or the entire country, which is really expensive. She was able to set it up so we could get those two states, which is really important because most of the major newspapers, especially back in the day, were published in Cincinnati. So the Cincinnati Commercial and various papers like that are in there. And I highly recommend you go try it out. Okay. You can get to it with your library card, like I said. And if we don't have the Post was only published, what we have starts in 1892. And everybody knows that there's people around here way before that. So use the Historical Enquirer and use the Cincinnati papers that are in newspaperarchive.com. Okay, we also have the Louisville Courier Dispatch up through 1922, which you're like, well, what good is that? Well, especially in the older days, okay, they picked up news all up and down the river. So you will find news about the Cincinnati area, the Covington area, the Newport area, and some of the smaller towns in between. And I think there were a lot of families that actually went back and forth. Maybe they had family that lived in Louisville. So you get that like society news. Mr. and Mrs. Smith journeyed down to Louisville last Sunday to meet with their aunt for dinner or something like that. And those are clues, right? Those are clues. We also subscribe to the Chicago Defender. That was one of the major African-American newspapers published in the country for a long time. And the really awesome thing about it is that they had a ton of society news in them, meaning they would pick up news from all these small towns that had African-American populations. And this is really helpful in the Kentucky area. And when I say society, it's just like what you'd think. Mr. John Smith and Mrs. Amy Jones, or Miss Amy Jones, were married at the such Baptist church last Sunday or last Saturday. Again, it's newspaper news, and you might not find that news anywhere else. So if you do an African American research, I highly recommend that database. So those, like I said, you can all access with your Kenton County Library card. And there's a ton of other stuff. I mean, like I said, right now you can access Ancestry from home. And I know you all have probably been losing sleep due to that. It's okay. And one more, and then I'm going to let you go for the day unless you have any questions. The Digital Public Library of America. Now, that's not a paid database, but it's a group effort. So libraries all across the United States and other places as well, but mostly the United States, have uploaded digital data to this one place, the Digital Public Library of America, for you to access. And some of the Kenton County Library digital collections are going on there as well. So if you don't have anything else to do, or if you haven't tried it yet, I highly recommend that website. And then finally, I thought of one more, the Internet Archive. Talk about a time sinkhole. You can get down in there and not come back up till midnight. It's also a free website, and basically their goal is to save the internet as much as they can. And so not only do they have digitized books, they have census records, they have family histories, county histories, they have video, they have audio. You can listen to some speeches from people from way back. It's really quite cool. And there's now TV shows, and mostly news, when I say TV shows. So if you've never explored the Internet Archive, it's archive.org, and it'll take you right there. So thank you all who tuned in today. We will not be posting next Sunday because it's Easter and we would be closed anyway. But there's a good chance we'll be back the Sunday after that. And who knows? We're all hoping for an end to this, but we also all want to be safe. So everybody take care of yourselves. If you have any questions, send us an email at history@kentonlibrary.org. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.